This week on The Futurists, Hannes Sjoblad.
I think we're approaching something which is a greater integration between our thought processes and the world around us. What we need to do is we need to break down the sort of hurdle of communication, integrating computing into our senses in a much closer ways.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King. Today, we are going all the way to Stockholm, and we're going to talk about biohacking and how AI affects longevity and, lots of interesting things with our guest, who is Hannes Sjoblad. Hannes, welcome to The Futurists.
Amazing to be able to join you. I'm a great fan of the podcast, so absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Long-time listener, first-time guest, right?
Indeed. So, yeah.
So we met recently in Dubai. We had this amazing futurist dinner that Ken Rutowski put on. Pablos Holman was there, also David Shingy, and yourself and myself. We were hanging out and talking, and I thought this is a great opportunity to get you on the show and talk about some of the work that you're doing. Of course, you've worked with Singularity University. You're on the faculty for SU Nordics region, but you're involved in a lot of really interesting stuff. You market yourself as a biohacker, or you position yourself as a biohacker. So for people who aren't familiar, how would you describe what a biohacker is?
Right. So in the broadest sense, a biohacker is someone, let's take the word hacker, right? So a hacker, people will have this image of it's a person who breaks into computer systems to steal data or something similar. But essentially, the meaning of hacking is just to experiment with something. We have a tool or something which is designed for a certain purpose. What happens if we apply it for a completely different purpose? That is essentially a hack. Now, what differs us biohackers from old school hackers, those that work with computer hardware and software, is that we work with wetware. So biohackers work with modifying biological systems. That can be anything from genetically engineering bacteria in your student dorm to putting chip implants under your skin, or putting a lot of sensors on your body to measure sort of all kinds of variables in your system, and testing stuff. Oh, how can I modify my sleep cycle by taking a certain supplement at a certain time day, and then you measure it according to the good old methodology from the quantified self movement, namely that I am enough of a study person, a study where n equals 1, so I experiment on myself. So those are some of the things we do here in the biohacker community here in Sweden, of which I've been an early member and a driving force for the last decade.
In Sweden is quite an innovative country, generally punching well above your weight, with many really interesting innovations coming out of there, over the last couple of decades. But tell me about the futurist community there and how you yourself became a futurist.
Sure. I think Sweden is an interesting country to look at as a futurist, because Sweden is a very, compared to many other, especially European countries or cultures, it's a more forward-looking culture in many essences than traditional. If you take Italy or France, these countries that have a lot of monuments, a very deep and rich history that they're very proud of, and they come back to rituals and deep traditions in how the country is run and how people think of themselves. Sweden was a pretty poor country 100 years ago. We didn't have much of an urban culture. It was a country of farmers, of moderate wealth. And whatever is Swedish is something that we built over the last few generations to a very significant extent. And in modern Sweden, there is also a certain disdain for tradition. I think that's not just here, but I think the trend is perhaps stronger here than in a lot of other places. And that means that Swedes may come across as, interested in new trends, quick to pick up new things, not that interested in tradition, culture, and these things. Now, of course, I simplify and generalize, but I think there's something in the mentality over here that makes Sweden a more forward-looking society than many other, at least here in Europe. Now, yes, if we look at Asia or the US, with younger nations that are more forward-looking, I think you will see the same. But for European context, that would be my observation.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I know you were the chief disruption officer at Epicenter, which is it's a innovation community, right? I guess incubator plus workshops and so forth.
Exactly.
So tell me about the community, that you're involved in terms of how you guys exchange ideas on that. How is what's it like being in Stockholm in the field you're in? Do you feel you've got plenty of support? Because it's a fairly small country comparative to, say, the US, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's not even comparable at scale. Sweden has 10 million inhabitants, whereof roughly 2 million in the Stockholm area. And yes, so it's a small, close-knit community where pretty much most people know each other, or everyone is one introduction away. But I think the Stockholm tech scene is a very interesting place to be. There's quite a lot of capital. There's a lot of hardworking, innovative people. So I find great inspiration in the tech ecosystem where I spend most of my time. So Epicenter, yes, is an innovation hub which has houses in Stockholm, Oslo, and Helsinki across the Nordics, all on 60 degrees north, Oslo, Stockholm, and Helsinki. And we run a lot of activities and events. You can roughly compare it to a WeWork, but which is focused specifically on building digital innovation and scaling innovative businesses. So and it's been quite successful. A lot of the cool sort of tech companies that have started and grown in Sweden have at one time or later been part of the Epicenter community. So, but what I do enjoy, Brett, is of course, as a biohacker, is that in any ecosystem, there are the big trees, right? The big tech giants where, people can make a lot of money. And then you have the small growing saplings, which are the new startups and the up and rising. But what I'm interested in is what is in the undergrowth, what is under the leaves. Sometimes you kick away some leaves, there's some creepy crawly things, but there's also where some really interesting things happen. And that's also why I enjoy hanging out at maker spaces and more sort of subculture events among the effective altruists and the transhumanists and the futurists and the biohackers and all these, which are also part of the tech ecosystem, but which are not formalized in the same way. So that's where a lot of interesting things come up.
Yeah. Now, I did note that you also were a co-founder of an interesting company, Biohacking. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly.
Well, it's Biohacking means bio-curious. Essentially, we borrowed the awesome name of the Californian biohackers community, translated it to good old Swedish.
And so you guys used to hold parties to do RFID chip implants and stuff, right?
Yeah, that was one of the many activities we did, but one which happened to catch the attention of a lot of people with cameras. I mean, it just was something about getting a chip implant and posting it on social media. It just worked really well. So, but we did a lot of other things. I mean, focusing on health, understanding digital biology in terms of messing with bacteria, for example. We did a lot of workshops. We did another great workshop where we did smart tattoos on ourselves by putting conductive ink on our bodies, so making blinking lights, turning ourselves into Christmas trees. So, for me, the experimental part is a core component of my whole interest in futurism. So, yes, I love to read books about the classic sci-fi, what are the latest futurist writers like yourself and many great others are writing. But I'm also very much a practitioner, Brett, and so that's why I enjoy fiddling with devices, swallowing the odd pill, seeing where that takes me. Right.
So
there's theory and there's practice.
Yeah, you've probably been watching Brian Johnson, this billionaire guy, obviously, I wouldn't know. I don't know if you'd call him a biohacker, although, he's obviously.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, I'm happy to welcome him in the biohacker camp. Brian Johnson has leveled up a lot of things that we have been already doing for many years in the biohacking community. So, but with a wealth and a flair for PR, he certainly made a lot more people aware that, in fact, there are a lot of therapies now that you can apply to yourself to potentially extend your lifespan. And Brian, if you trust the data he's putting out there, it's pretty impressive, right? He can show, he does this aging checks of his system, and he says, my heart is now 20 years younger than my passport age. My blood vessels are as, you know, as when I was 19. These things is pretty awesome. So thank you, honestly, to Mr. Johnson for taking, you know, the cost and this experimentation upon himself so that the rest of us can learn.
Yeah. So tell me about your regime and how you learn about the various techniques or decide on what to experiment with as a biohacker.
Right. Oh, you mean my daily regime, or
or just, you know, in terms of, you know, in terms of the things that you decide as a biohacker to pursue, you know, how do you find out about this stuff? How do you keep yourself informed? What's your process?
Right. So yeah, my inspiration comes, of course, from following a lot of people in different spaces on social media. Social media has been fantastic for this subculture. And there are communities, great communities in many places. We have one in Stockholm. There's an awesome community in Paris, for example, that I visited several times. They have a beautiful biohacking space there. And in terms of what I do, it's a broad portfolio of health things. I mean, I, of course, am very interested in longevity myself. I enjoy every day of life and would love to have as many days at my disposal as possible. But I'm also fascinated, and what I would say is sort of at the heart of my professional pursuits is the concept of extending human senses through technology. And that is something that I have invested in, and both time and money in many instances, looking at what can we add to the human body in order to give us a different perception and different understanding of the world around us. This could be, for example, wearable devices that have haptic input for, you know, to give you a different layer of understanding of where you are. One wonderful hack we did some years ago was when we blindfolded ourselves, and there's an app on a smartphone that you can use as for echolocation. So we walk through epicenter pretending to be dolphins, maneuvering through stairwells, etc. Absolutely fascinating, completely different perception of the world. So, I mean, for me, tech and futurism is also a lot of fun. It has to be. It's about the practical exploration of the edges of human experience that, you know, it's absolutely, it never ceases to fascinate.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's an interesting field. Certainly, it's a lot more. I think it's becoming a lot more mainstream and acceptable for people to, you know, want to measure, you know, the quantified self, as we call it, understanding more about your own body and your own health. You know, we've got, of course, people like Dave Asprey, who I think is coming on a future show with the bulletproof regime and so forth, and others sort of looking at these techniques and so forth these days. And you know, part of this is that we are getting better sensor technology. We are getting better data that enables us to sort of start thinking about taking a position on what we can do. You know, I myself have been through an interesting journey where I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I'm now back to a pre-diabetic stage because of you know, change in regime, changing the way I eat, you know, some medication and so forth. But I think I'll be able to come off all my medication in the future. But that is been a very much data-based approach. You know, you have to really look at the data. You have to you know, and you have to sort of you have to be doing this sort of every day. So when was it you sort of first figured out you know, that you wanted to start hacking your own biology?
Oh, I remember the day even. So this was no surprise, when I attended Singularity University in 2010. That was a fantastic wake-up moment for me. So Singularity University, founded in 2009, I think. So I was there in the very early days because I was following Ray Kurzweil's blog at the time, and they made a post, and I said, this is a place I have to go to. So it really transformed my career and my life pursuits going there, and understanding the power of how technology changes not just business, but also society and ultimately our own bodies. It captured me, and there was no other option really than to pursue these things full time for me. So I was at the time working in a finance firm in London, and I had been there for some years, but I saw that there was something more interesting that I could do. And so I changed tracks, and now for the last decade, I've been a startup entrepreneur, and I've founded a handful of tech companies that work, among other things, with generative AI or with smart wearables. So all of the things often sort of a bit out there, and people say, unfortunately, in some cases, we've been a bit too early with great ideas. But
it's one of the challenges of being a futurist. I started
the timing.
I started moving in 2010 as the world's first mobile challenger bank, and we just couldn't raise money, in those early days, because it was too early. Of course, now we have Revolut and Nubank and all of these players. So, but that's the curse of being a futurist, I think. You mentioned you mentioned generative AI. I do want to get into that in terms of in the pursuit of longevity.
Yes.
Which is really why, biohacking can also be about personal expression. We've seen recently, for example, some experimentation with different forms of prosthetics that don't fit, a sort of a typical view of what a prosthetic should be. And, others doing some experimentation, as you say, for creating different sensors and things. But the primary driver for biohacking seems to be longevity and sort of pursuing that. But where do you think artificial intelligence is giving us new tools in the pursuit of longevity?
Well, it's a convergence of a couple of different tech phenomena that are familiar to the listeners, obviously. So it's the growth in sensors that are now so cheap. I like to say that sensors are like sand. We can pretty much pour them on anything, including ourselves. The growth in the number of cheap quality sensors gives us much greater data sets about ourselves. And that in turn allows us to feed the machine learning systems. The greater amount of data gives us greater insights, better patterns. And this is where I think AI will do its main purpose. The personalized personal coach, nutritionist that reads my data and gives me my recommendations about, Hannes, you need to adjust your diet in this direction. I mean, pre-diabetes is an excellent example. A urine sample will tell you there's some trouble down the road unless you take action now. And it's actually perfect illustration. And then with the help of a smart assistant helping you what to shop, what to eat, how to exercise, when to exercise, using wearables and these tools, we can build very sophisticated platforms already today. And I think that in a few years, these things will be absolutely ubiquitous. We'll all have smart assistants in our phones that are personalized, that access our data and give us life recommendations. And I would want there to be, Brett, a setting where you can make your personal coach friendly or a bit more, stern. So, yeah. And then I say, so it's my New Year's promise. Okay, I reached like my targets just by 60 or 70%. Then I have to up the coach a notch. And we change the tone of the conversation between me and my virtual assistant. Or, if I'm in good shape, at least for me who live in Sweden at the very Nordic latitude, I've noticed a very interesting pattern, which is a yearly cycle. And I typically bottom out in terms of the worst stress and worst health situation in December. And then in August, after, sunshine and rest, my blood sample data is much stronger. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting to sort of think about the fact that, we are building these tools that, will be able to give us this coaching. I like the fact that you sort of talk about the fact that you could dial it up a bit, have it a bit more aggressive. We actually worked on something very similar for financial health, back in the early days, whether it's physical health or future health. But listen, at this stage, before we go to the break, we have this feature. I'm sure you've heard it on the previous episode, which just helps people get to know you a bit better. It's called our lightning round, and just a few quick questions. Just keep your answers short and pithy, so we can get to know you a bit better. All right?
Shoot.
Here we go. This is the lightning round. What was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to on TV or via literature?
Most likely Terminator series.
The T-1000. Yes.
Yeah, in the 1980s. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What technology do you think has most changed humanity?
Well, humanity collectively is definitely the green revolution, based on the Haber-Bosch method of producing artificial fertilizers, because without that innovation, there would be about 3-4 billion humans on this planet, not 8.
Yeah. And, we are entering a new era of food production and food issues, food scarcity, and so forth. So we need to keep that top of mind. You mentioned Ray Kurzweil earlier, but is there any other futurists or entrepreneurs that have particularly influenced you?
Well, one of my greatest inspirations is Raymond McCauley, who is also a faculty member at Singularity University, specialized on the digitalization of biology. His insights are profound and always inspirational to take part of.
Interesting.
But yes, Peter Diamandis is also a great inspiration. How he makes storytelling for everyone about how the world is changing.
Yeah, he's got a new podcast too, and he just had Ray on the podcast. So, check that out if you haven't seen Peter's new stuff. And of course, Abundance 360 and SU, all very cool stuff. What's the best prediction that or foresight that you've seen a futurist or a entrepreneur or sci-fi practitioner demonstrate?
Again, I picked up a book in the year 2000 where Richard Dawkins, the biologist,
right,
wrote about the exponential growth of or the exponential development of DNA technology. This was so early, and it was 10 years later when I read it again that I realized what he said at that point. So I think that was amazing. He's not often thought of as a futurist, but that prediction was impressively powerful at that time.
I agree. Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because he's not. I wouldn't call Dawkins a classic futurist, but he has shown us.
He saw these things. Yeah.
I mean, I think if you're a specialist in these different areas, that you are going to see trends and where that might take you. I mean, that's really at the heart of being a futurist as well. Well, fantastic, Hannes. Let's take a quick break. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King. We're going to be right back after this break. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcasts, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific, and the FinTech 5. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network, and Next Gen Banker. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King. We are continuing our interview with Hannes Sjoblad. Hannes, in the biohacking community, one of the things that keeps coming up in sort of the conversation is the cyborgification element, the transhumanist approach, merging man and machine. And we've done this for many years. You know, people wear pacemakers. We now have robotic prosthetics. This is not a new development, but you know, when you look at like the world of cyberpunk and things like that, you know, the potential for this is pretty strong. And of course, one of the recent developments that has captured a lot of media attention is the work that Elon Musk and Neuralink have done. They've got their first human clinical trial of the Neuralink brain-computer interface. And most recently, the first patient was reportedly implanted with this and now can control a phone and computer with their mind. And they're looking at recruiting now patients with quadriplegia or ALS for their technologies. But where do you sit on, you know, not specifically, I guess, in a Neuralink? If you want to comment on that, please do. But in respect to biohacking, where we're talking about sort of these implants, we're talking about potentially, you know, having a prosthetic, or connecting our brains to AI and so forth in the future. Do you think that is a likely outcome, or do you think that the biological route is sort of going to be more popular, sort of enhancing our biology and you know, working just first on sort of that immortality or at least longevity element?
Wow, there's so many good questions in here, Brett. But let me try to split that up a little bit. So, one of my big passions and something I've spoken a lot about in a lot of settings is, of course, human augmentation technologies. I like to divide them into three categories. So we have the pharmacological enhancement category of technologies. We have the cybernetic, electronic-based ones, and then we have the genetic, bio-based ones. So three broad categories. And pharma, I guess I don't have to explain, but the whole space of cybernetic augmentation is absolutely fascinating. It's very, very wide. As you can say, yes, there are people who they need a new leg after a car accident, or, you know, now we have some terrible wars with a lot of landmines, people losing limbs. So there is a demand for the basic setup. We've seen some fascinating developments in that space. Now we have osseointegration. You can actually grow these devices, not like something you stick on a stump like an old shoe, but something you truly integrate with both nerve and bone system of the body. So there's some fascinating developments there. The question, of course, is that, yes, to replace a lost limb is sensible to most people, but what about the enhancements? Would you like an extra limb? Would you like an extra eye? Would you like a tail? Why not? Right. It's my comment when that comes up.
Yeah. I guess or you know, like will humans that have no disabilities decide in the future to get an amputation so they can get augmentations, right?
Indeed. And we have some interest. I mean, pop culture, or with all the cyberpunk movies and computer games and whatnot, means that there are generations that have grown up with this imagery and the awareness of these technologies and the, you know, pros and cons and whatnot. So principally, I think the demand is there. A lot of people would be interested in eyes with a different level of eyesight or different functions in the body. So then it's up to us entrepreneurs and innovators to actually build these solutions and take them to market. And this is why I, for a number of years, was very fascinated with chip implants, something which I currently am not active in that space anymore, but which is a chip implant is like the tiniest prosthetic you can get yourself.
Right.
It's principally safe. We know we put it in billions of animals, but it can give the body a few new functions. And that was the whole idea behind the drive we did. We wanted to give humankind a new organ, which was the first digital organ in our bodies, something that would sit under your skin and transmit smart digital information to your phone about the state of the meat bag and what happens under the skin. And that, I think, is still a very valid value proposition. And in terms of risk and harm, chip implants are pretty much harmless, and they add some interesting value. So I do have a few implants myself. For example, I have one here below my collarbone that reads my body temperature if I swipe it with my phone. So I think that's pretty neat. Now I'm a man biologically. Had I been a woman, it would have been more useful. I could have used that implant to track my monthly cycle. And so that was one of the cases we developed, was that you could use these implants as a reproductive health technology, especially for people who may not afford an Apple Watch or some more expensive rig. You would just have this tiny implant that costs a few dollars under your skin, and you'd be able to have a very good reading of your body temperature changes over time. So I think there is great potential. Yes, I may be biased in this particular field, I'm happy to admit, but I can't wait for more mainstream prosthetics to be available to people.
So let's talk about the future, and take us out 20 or 30 years. What do you think will be possible as a biohacker in that time frame? And do you see the species diverging into, like enhanced or augmented humans? What do you see as the potential over the next 20 to 30 years for this field?
Yeah. So if we start even in the more near term, I think the fact that we can have a virtual assistant monitoring our health, that is not 20 years away. That's less than that will happen in this decade. Now, here's one of my favorite terms, is that sometimes people are worried, okay, do I want something that monitors my system at all times? Is this not a Big Brother society type idea? But my favorite counter argument to this is, no, I prefer to call it the Big Sister society, thinking of the Big Sister as not the bully, exploitative Big Brother that oppresses people, but the Big Sister that cares about you, that nurses, like we call a nurse or a nun a sister, someone who cares about you and wants your best, right? And who helps you get there. So that kind of a monitoring system. Then I sometimes get to hear, okay, Hannes, I can tell that you haven't had any sisters when you grow up. If you want to have a big... That's a correct observation, but I still like the idea. But looking a few years further ahead, Brett, what I envision is that we are approaching a much more, and the Neuralink, even though it's very, very early type product, it's still an interesting concept. Now, it should also be mentioned in terms of Neuralink that this research with brain implants, it's been going on at a lot of universities around the world for the last 30, 40 years. So essentially, there's nothing really new. It's just the PR that is new around Neuralink and the branding, I guess. But I think we're approaching something which is a greater integration between our thought processes and the world around us, which is right now still has to be conveyed through these ape hands that we do. I mean, we have to type on keyboards in order to convey our thoughts from our brain to the connected web around us. And what we need to do is we need to break down the sort of hurdle of communication, integrating computing into our senses in a much, much closer way. Yes, using, for example, the optic nerve, which is probably the best conveyor of information into the human brain, but also being able for us to send information at a much, much greater bandwidth out from our thought processes. So where I think we're going is that we're slowly building this global hive mind where we integrate all the humans. So if you look at the data right now, we are about 2/3 of humankind are regular internet users. There's still a couple of billion people that may use the internet occasionally or still don't have access at all. But that is something which we will catch up with in the coming decades. And the old rule, if you recall, of 6 degrees of separation, that the average distance from two people on this planet was 6 introductions. That number has gone down to about 3.
Right.
Thanks to smartphones and social media, I expect that number to go down to 1 in the coming 20 years. So essentially, if everyone has a smartphone in their pockets, yeah, well, they're still one step behind. You still need to add someone on LinkedIn in order to send them a message. But the interesting here is, as Peter Thiel says, the hard step is from 0 to 1, and from my perspective, in terms of the integration of all of us into the hive mind, is the step from 1 to 0, which is when there's not one step of introduction between each human, but when it's actually 0. So there's like, yes, you can access other people's thought streams in real time. Now that's a bit into the future, but for me, the trend, that is where we're going. Now, of course, it will be voluntary. Not everyone will want to broadcast their thoughts online, but what social media also tells us is quite a few people are willing to share surprisingly personal things in
right.
channels.
We're sharing what we're eating, when we're exercising. Yeah, so yeah,
we're an exhibitionistic species.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you think, because longevity is a big area of concern for you, and obviously more of a daily pursuit, but how do you think living longer is going to change society? Have you thought about that as a biohacker, how longevity might change the way we prioritize and the way we learn and the way we live, our pursuits?
Yeah, this is something we discuss all the time. And on a personal level, I think I see a lot of benefits in terms of less stress, career stress, family stress, a soft understanding that there is time, right? There is time to do the things on your bucket list. You don't need to do all these things before the age of 30 or 40 or 50. There is actually more time than you expect for most of us. And for me, on a personal level, I think that is a very sound thing to incorporate into your thought process and your life planning. Then we have the societal aspects of it. Yes, I mean, those are also well known to the listeners here in terms of what will the pension system look like, what will the healthcare system look like. Now, what we were active as activists in the longevity space, and I'm one of the founders of the Swedish Longevity Cluster, which is a very active community. We have weekly meetups, activities. We have a pitch night next week where we bring in a bunch of startups and scale-ups who are all working with longevity solutions and match them with investors. Is, of course, that people will live longer, but in that equation, we also expect that they will not necessarily be like today's 80-year-olds, high consumers of healthcare services. So we expect to be healthy and not in a need of massive
right.
healthcare interventions.
I think that's an important thing, because people, they think about living longer and they think about you getting older and older still, but we're talking about fundamentally slowing the aging process and giving you better, what do they call it?
Health span, not lifespan.
Right, health span. Yeah, health span. Not, yeah, exactly. So, better health over a longer period. But I mean, culturally, as you say, if you don't have to worry about, getting older, if you don't have to worry about finances as well, like in a UBI scenario or something like that, you are obviously able to pursue very different fields of interest and so forth. So we've got, but I think when you combine longevity and you combine the wealth that AI is going to create and leading to universal basic income and its disruption of work, I think one of the really interesting things is how do you decide on what you do with your life? Like you could stay in education for the first 40 years of your life before you decide to start working in a career. You could decide to commit your life to community service, for the rest of your life and things. So I think I see UBI as, or the sort of the collapse of the work to live system that we have today, which is, I think, inevitable with AI creating sort of a really different way of thinking about living. Maybe that's more authentic human experiences, because if you think about humanity in the distant past, I mean, we just lived. We went and got enough food for the day. Sometimes it'd be food for a couple of weeks, and we just lived our life. And it was storytelling, and moving from one place to another, and the migratory activities and things. But living in cities and working 9 to 5 is not the natural state of humans historically.
I'm
So
always careful when I use the word normal, right?
yes, okay,
And natural, those are sensitive.
right,
I mean,
right.
I think it's sometimes we think that going back to farming before we had fertilizers and pesticides is natural. My perspective as a technologist is that technology is natural. Right?
Mm,
Smartphone is something of nature.
right.
Synthetic materials, yes, some things may be harmful to biological systems, but still, uh, what is a bird nest? Is it nature or technology? So that is, I think, often a question that people struggle to answer because it's both. And I wanted to comment on your thought about, or side comment about education as well. I think education is something that we'll all be doing in and out throughout our lifetimes to a much greater extent, rather than this is something we do in just first few years. I want universities to be like memberships. So you should
Ah,
be a member of the Royal Institute of Technology for life, and you go back there every few years. You go to an alumni event, you take a week, you take some online class, and it's like a subscription with
mm,
someone you know and trust. And I think that for me is the model about adult education, is that you should always be able to go back and replenish your insights at your alma mater or a source that you like.
yeah. No, that makes sense. You know, that sort of lifelong learning approach, I think, is if it's available to you, you know, why wouldn't you pursue it? So, all right, let's talk. You know, 2040, 2050, assuming that your longevity treatments work and you're still
Mm-hmm.
around then. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Oh, I
Taylor Swift.
certainly hope so.
Taylor Swift is going to be in her 60s in 2050, right? So just putting it in
Yeah,
context. But so you're
maybe
going to
Biden will still be president,
right, absolutely.
or Putin.
Yeah, Putin, yes. You know, tell me about how you think
Mm,
society may have changed around
mm,
the view of our health and,
mm,
you know, whether
mm,
that, you know, because right now that it's not a universal right. So when you talk about
mm,
longevity and you talk
mm,
about these sorts of things,
mm,
is that just going to be a basic function of society? Do you still see it as being sort of commercially driven like we have
mm,
in the
mm, mm,
US and only the rich are
mm,
getting the longevity treatments? What do you
mm.
think?
I think that the biggest change that longevity will bring about is to reduce the short-termism of current society. The sort of the quarter capitalism, or the short-sightedness of
Yeah.
exploitation that we often see, which is one of the backsides of the market system, right? So go there, quick profits, get your bonus, cash out, move on, right? And if we all live longer, we'll have different and more mature perspectives on these things, and there will be fewer stresses in that regard. So for me, longevity is a factor which will help us achieve also societal sustainability, which we're currently struggling with in terms of overuse of natural resources, for example. So in that sense, I think it's an essential sort of human cultural factor into bringing about that sort of transformation.
Yeah.
What do I envision life to be at that stage? I think if it's a treatment, probably it's a combination of pharma, maybe some epigenetic changes we'll have to make in our bodies.
Mm.
I would expect them to be available to all people on this planet.
Mm.
Or at least all of those that can be reached, and who are willing to take it. Because yes, we also know that there are communities who may select not to be part of that, as we've seen, or also in current society.
Yes.
But yes, in the US, it may be largely market driven. This is always the case with new things. They begin as expensive and not working so well. The Brian Johnsons, they spend the upfront
Yeah, like
investment.
a couple of $1 million a year, right? 2.5 million a year or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Plus,
That's not
plus.
for everyone. But
No.
these insights are now shareable. The scientists are documenting the therapies, and will, I think, definitely by 2050, these will be universally available, and they should be. That's part of
Yeah.
our responsibility to make life better for
Absolutely.
all living and thinking beings on this planet and other planets, which we will hopefully also be squatting on.
Now we're talking. We didn't even talk about bioaugmentation, so that we can live in the rest of the solar system or travel into space. Which we'll have to leave that for the next time. But
I'll give you a one-liner on this,
sure.
and it's simply that I'm not a very big friend of terraforming. I think it's the wrong way around. We'd rather change ourselves so that we can live on these places as they are, rather than trying to change entire planetary systems to look like Earth.
Yeah, there was a good sci-fi movie on Titan. Do you remember that movie?
No, not
that had
sure.
that theme. No, it was let me sci-fi movie.
Because terraforming Mars would take 1 million years or a few 100,000 years. Changing humans or biological beings can take 100 years.
Exactly. So it's called The Titan. And it stars Sam Worthington, who of course is known for his role in Avatar, where he is biologically modified so that he and his astronaut partner can go to Titan, but in doing so becomes a Titan instead of a human, because he's there's such a divergence. So check that out if you're interested in the concept that Hannes is talking about. Hannes, it's been great to have you on the show today. Tell me, how can people keep in touch with you? How can they follow you? In terms of the community you're involved in, and just keeping up with your work.
Well, I mean, quite easy to find on Facebook, LinkedIn, and other social platforms. So sometimes under the moniker Nordic Futurism, which is a more of an aesthetic angle on futurism that we like to take and incorporate certain Nordic style elements, but also societal, for a separate conversation.
And you also use the moniker Hannes Sapiens.
True, because as a label of the state I'm currently in. So right now I'm still a Homo sapiens. At one day I hope to be able to change that label and add another better one.
Homo Deus, or
or Homo se evolutis, the self-evolving human. That's I think the state we should be working on.
Fantastic. Well, Hannes Sjoblad, thanks for joining us on The Futurist today, and we wish you all the best. As you know how we finish off the show, for our listeners, please, if you like the show, tweet it out. Let us know in the comments, what you thought, what you'd like to hear from next, who you'd like to hear from next. Give us a shout out on social media, give us a 5-star rating. All of that sort of stuff helps. But in the meantime, we'll be back next week with more from The Futurists. Until then, we'll see you in the future.
Well, that's it for The Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.